Welcome to Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go. This audio uses AI narration to present our original book analysis. Today we're going to be diving deep into Karen Armstrong's Islam, A Short History. It's a book that is absolutely brimming with insights, and we're going to try to pull out the most significant points for you so you can walk away with a really solid understanding of how this faith evolved, the pivotal turning points in that really kind of intricate dance between politics and religion.
And one of the things that Armstrong does really well is she connects that internal spiritual journey with the external political landscape. And it emphasizes that for Muslims, history isn't just a backdrop. It's an integral part of their religious experience.
Yeah, it's about more than just doctrines and rituals, right? It's about building a just society, an ummah that embodies divine will. But to truly grasp that, I guess we need to journey back to 7th century Arabia.
Exactly. Picture a world of tribal societies, bustling trade routes, and Mecca, this vibrant hub centered around the ancient Kaaba shrine. This is where we first encounter Muhammad.
So before the revelations, what was his life like? I mean, was he a scholar? Was he a merchant?
His early life was, fairly typical for the time, but then came a profound spiritual awakening, a series of revelations that formed the foundation of the Quran.
And it wasn't just the message that had an impact, right? I mean, the Quran's poetic power, the sheer beauty of its language drew people in, even skeptics.
Absolutely. Armstrong highlights the story of Umar ibn al-Khattab, a staunch opponent of Muhammad, but also a lover of poetry. Upon hearing the Quran, he was profoundly moved, his resistance seemingly just dissolving under the weight of its artistry.
So the artistry of the Quran was almost like a bridge to its message, this message of social justice, building a compassionate community that shared its wealth and protected its vulnerable.
Precisely. And this emphasis on action, on striving for a just and equitable society, this is what Armstrong refers to as the jihad. It's a concept that's often misunderstood, but in its original context, it's about an inner and outer struggle for a better world.
We hear the word jihad thrown around with very negative connotations today. I can see how understanding its origins and true meaning is important. So we have Muhammad, we have the Quran, this powerful call for social justice. But how did this movement evolve into a sprawling empire?
It begins with the Hijra, Muhammad's strategic move from Mecca to Medina in 622 CE. This marked the birth of the first Muslim community with the mosque at its heart.
The mosque wasn't just a place of worship, was it?
Not at all. Think of it as a community center, a space for discussing every aspect of life, political, social, even military matters. This reflects that intrinsic link between faith and daily life that characterizes Islam.
And as the community grew, they faced challenges from hostile tribes. They found themselves in battles. What struck me was their treatment of those they conquered.
That's a crucial point. This is where we see the concept of dhimmi as protected subjects. They were permitted to practice their own religions and paid a tax in exchange for protection. This was remarkably progressive for the time, religious freedom woven into the fabric of an expanding empire.
That's a far cry from how other empires of that time treated religious minorities. By 661 CE, just a few decades after Muhammad's death, the Muslim empire stretched from Persia to North Africa. That's an astounding pace of expansion.
It is. But this success brought new challenges, particularly the question of leadership. Who would succeed Muhammad? This is where we see the first major division within Islam, leading to the Shia and Sunni branches.
So the Shia believed leadership should remain within the Prophet's family, while the Sunni accepted a broader range of leaders. And this wasn't just a theoretical debate. What real-world consequences did this split have?
Well, it led to conflicts and power struggles. The first major civil war, the Fitna, exposed these fault lines, and it raised fundamental questions about Islamic governance. The rapid success forced Muslims to grapple with translating their ideals into the messy reality of running an empire.
And those struggles weren't limited to leadership. The lifestyle of the ruling Umayyad dynasty, their wealth and luxury, it kind of clashed with the Quran's emphasis on social justice and simplicity. It seems this period was marked by an intense effort to reconcile faith with the realities of power.
It was. And amidst these political upheavals, we see the Islamic world blossoming creatively. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem, built in 691 CE, is a prime example.
Oh, absolutely. Instead of depicting human figures, which would have been considered idolatry, the dome is adorned with verses from the Quran, a visual representation of the Word of God.
It's a powerful symbol of transcendence, and reflects the concept of Tawhid, the unity of God, which is central to Islam. The dome's perfect symmetry connecting heaven and earth embodies that unity.
So even as the empire grappled with political turmoil, Islam developed its own distinct artistic language. What other developments were happening during this period?
The Umayyad period witnessed the emergence of various religious movements, all wrestling with how to live out the Quran's message in a rapidly changing world. One of the most intriguing were the Carthagites.
The Kharjites. Those who believe the ruler should be the most pious Muslim, not necessarily the most powerful. They sound almost radical, pushing back against the status quo.
They were deeply critical of the Umayyads, accusing them of straying from the true path of Islam. Their questions were potent. What defines a true Muslim? Can a ruler who lives in luxury while his people suffer be considered righteous?
And these questions have an eerie relevance even today, reminding us of the ongoing struggle within Islam to reconcile ideals with power and governance. Their challenge to authority must have ruffled some feathers.
It certainly did, and this challenge wasn't just limited to political authority. The Kharjites' radical views forced theological debates about free will predestination and God's justice.
It's remarkable how political questions sparked such profound theological discussions. It highlights that for Muslims, faith is deeply intertwined with the pursuit of a just and equitable society. It's not just about personal piety, but about building a world reflecting divine will. It seems to me this tension between the ideal and the reality, between the spiritual and the political, continues to shape the evolution of Islam even today.
It certainly does. It certainly does. As we move into the Abbasid era, beginning in 750 CE, we see a shift in the center of Islamic power to Baghdad. This era ushered in a golden age of intellectual and cultural flourishing. Advancements in science, philosophy, and literature abound.
But didn't the Abbasids also actively encourage conversion to Islam, unlike the Umayyads? Wasn't there a risk that this could disrupt the existing social order?
There was. They overthrew the Umayyads, partly by capitalizing on the discontent of non-Arab converts who felt like second-class citizens. But this influx of converts brought new cultural influences and ways of thinking, necessitating a more systematized approach to Islamic law and practice.
And that's where the ulama, the religious scholars, become so important. They were responsible for interpreting the Quran and the Prophet's teachings in a way that was relevant to this changing world.
Exactly. This period sees the development of the four main schools of Sunni Islamic jurisprudence, each grappling with adapting the Quran and the Prophet's teachings to a rapidly changing world. They essentially created a roadmap for Muslim life, covering everything from prayer and ritual to social interactions and legal matters.
Did everyone just accept this roadmap? There must have been disagreements about how to interpret the Quran and the Prophet's teachings.
There were, of course, vigorous debates arose about the role of reason versus revelation, tradition versus innovation. These debates mirrored philosophical and theological discussions happening in the West at the same time.
So these weren't just Islamic questions, but universal human questions about understanding the world, faith, reason, and creating a just society. But within the Islamic world, these debates had real political implications, didn't they?
Absolutely. A compelling example is the Mina, a period of inquisition under Caliph al-Ma'mun in the 9th century. He attempted to enforce Mu'tazilism, a theological doctrine emphasizing reason.
It's a sobering reminder that power and theology are often intertwined. Even during periods of intellectual flourishing, there can be attempts to impose one correct way of thinking. But wasn't al-Ma'mun ultimately unsuccessful?
He was. The ulama pushed back, leading to a more diverse and nuanced approach to Islamic thought. This demonstrates that the Islamic world wasn't monolithic. There were and always have been different perspectives, different schools of thought vying for influence. Alongside these legal and theological developments, we also witness the rise of Sufism, a mystical dimension of Islam.
Sufism. It's all about directly experiencing the divine, often through practices like meditation, chanting, and poetry. The poetry of Rumi, a 13th century Sufi poet, comes to mind. It's a beautiful expression of that yearning for connection with the divine. But I understand that early on Sufism wasn't always welcomed with open arms.
That's right. Some viewed Sufism with suspicion, concerned that their emphasis on personal experience might lead them away from the Quran and the Prophet's teachings. It's a classic tension between mystics and institutional authorities, each vying for legitimacy.
So how did Sufism gain acceptance within mainstream Islam?
Influential figures like al-Ghazali played a key role. This 11th century theologian argued that the external practices of Sharia Islamic law and the internal spiritual practices of Sufism were complementary, two sides of the same coin.
So he bridged the gap between the legalistic and the mystical, creating a path that appealed to a broad spectrum of Muslims. His work, The Revival of the Religious Sciences, must have been quite impactful.
It was a classic of Islamic spirituality, offering a guide to cultivate that inner connection with God while living a life grounded in Sharia. This helped make Sufism a more accepted part of Islamic tradition.
This paints a picture of a more diverse Islamic landscape. With various legal schools, the rise of Sufism, and ongoing debates about reason, revelation, and the state. But this diversity wasn't confined to the intellectual sphere. By the 10th century, the vast Abbasid Caliphate began to fragment. Did internal divisions contribute to this decline?
Internal division certainly played a role, but governing such a vast territory from a single center was also a challenge. New regional powers emerged, including the Seljuk Turks in the 11th century.
The Seljuks are interesting because they embraced a decentralized approach to governance, collaborating with the ulama at the local level. That's quite different from the centralized power of the Abbasid caliphs. What impact did this shift have on Islamic society?
The ulama gained more influence in shaping daily life. The Sharia became more deeply embedded in local communities, and Sufism continued to flourish. It seems the decline of the caliphate in an unexpected way allowed for a flourishing of Islamic practice at a more grassroots level.
It's like the saying, when one door closes, another one opens. What appears to be a setback can create opportunities for new forms of expression and organization. Speaking of setbacks, the Crusades must have been a major turning point for the Islamic world.
They were. The Crusades, beginning in the 11th century, were a series of military campaigns launched by European Christians. This period of conflict and upheaval sparked new forms of Islamic renewal and resistance.
The Crusades were a shock to the Muslim world. They brought violence and disruption, but also ignited new forms of solidarity, new interpretations of jihad, and a renewed focus on defending the faith. Didn't a figure like Saladin emerge from this period?
He did. Saladin, the Muslim leader who recaptured Jerusalem from the Crusaders in 1187, became a symbol of Islamic resistance and unity. His victory wasn't just about military prowess. He employed strategic alliances, political savvy, and a deep understanding of the region's complexities.
So he wasn't just a warrior, but a skilled diplomat and strategist. His approach to leadership resonates even today. The Crusades seem to have forced a moment of reckoning for the Islamic world, a time to confront new challenges and reevaluate their place in a changing world.
It did. This process of confrontation and reevaluation would continue as the Islamic world faced even greater challenges in the centuries to come.
It feels like this period set the stage for the encounters with modernity that would define the Islamic world in the 19th and 20th centuries. What happened next? Well, the Islamic world experienced another seismic shift with the Mongol conquests in the 13th century. Genghis Khan and his successors carved out this vast empire, leaving a trail of destruction and upheaval.
Yeah, it was a devastating period for the Islamic world. Cities were razed, libraries burned, countless lives lost. But as Armstrong points out, even amidst this destruction, we see these seeds of resilience and renewal within Islam.
The Mongols eventually converted to Islam themselves, and their empire, despite its brutal beginnings, became a patron of the art sciences, even Sufism. It's kind of a testament to the enduring strength and adaptability of Islamic civilization.
It is. And from this period of fragmentation and rebuilding, 3 new Islamic empires arose: the Ottomans, the Safavids, and the Mughals. Each was unique, grappling with the challenges of governance and faith in a world that was rapidly changing.
Yeah, let's delve into each of these empires a little bit. The Ottomans, centered in Turkey, grew into a major power, right? They controlled this vast territory encompassing much of the Middle East, North Africa, and even parts of Europe. So how do they navigate that relationship between religious and political authority?
Well, the Ottomans had a complex relationship with the ulama. Initially, they saw themselves as defenders of Sunni Islam, even claiming the title of caliph after conquering Egypt in the 16th century.
But that relationship wasn't static, was it? How did it evolve as the Ottomans faced pressure both from within and from rising European powers?
Yeah, over time, as they faced these mounting pressures, the Ottomans became more centralized and more authoritarian. And this had a significant impact on the ulama. They became more integrated into the state apparatus, losing some of their independence and their ability to critique the ruling powers.
That age-old tension between religious and political power. It's a recurring theme throughout Islamic history. It reemerges. But the Safavid Empire in Persia presents a fascinating contrast. They embraced Shia Islam as the state religion, and the ulama played a much more independent and influential role there. What was the dynamic like there?
So in Persia, the ulama often acted as a check on the Shah's power, advocating for the people's rights and upholding Islamic justice. And this dynamic continues to shape the political and religious landscape of Iran today. It's a reminder of the enduring influence of these historical precedents.
Now, the Mughals in India offer another really compelling case study, ruling over a predominantly Hindu population. Akbar, one of their most famous emperors, stands out for his religious tolerance and his efforts to create a more inclusive society.
Yeah, Akbar's reign was truly remarkable. He encouraged interfaith dialogue. He abolished the jizya, the tax on non-Muslims, and he even attempted to create a new syncretic religion that blended elements of Islam, Hinduism, and other faiths. He was striving for this model of peaceful coexistence and interfaith harmony, something that seems almost utopian even by today's standards.
He was a visionary leader ahead of his time. But even Akbar's tolerant approach wasn't universally embraced, right?
Yeah.
When he faced opposition from some within his own court and from more orthodox ulama, it demonstrates that even in the most tolerant societies, there will always be that resistance to change and a desire to cling to more rigid interpretations of faith.
Yeah, it's a tension we continue to grapple with today. As we transition into the 18th and 19th centuries, the Islamic world faced a new and formidable challenge, the rise of the West.
And this is where Armstrong's analysis becomes particularly relevant for understanding the modern Muslim experience. She argues that Europe's scientific, industrial, and political revolutions created this new type of civilization, one that ultimately dominated the globe. And this wasn't just military dominance, was it?
Not at all. It was a dominance rooted in ideas, technology, and economic power. The Islamic world, already grappling with internal challenges and divisions, was ill-prepared for this new global order.
And this resulted in the colonization of large parts of the Muslim world by European powers, from North Africa to the Middle East to South Asia. Muslims found themselves under the control of empires that often viewed their culture and their faith as inferior. This must have been a period of profound disillusionment.
Yeah, it was a period of humiliation and dislocation. It led to this deep soul-searching within the Muslim world. How could a faith and civilization that had once been so dominant find itself subjugated by the West? This question became central to the modern Islamic experience, sparking movements of reform and revival, new interpretations of jihad, and this renewed focus on reclaiming Islam's past glory.
It seems like Muslims were trying to navigate this new landscape, to reconcile their faith with the challenges of modernity, to reclaim their agency in a world that had become increasingly hostile. What were some of the key figures and movements that emerged from this period?
Well, we see figures like Jamal al-Din al-Afghani, who advocated for pan-Islamic unity and resistance to Western imperialism. We see Muhammad Abduh, who promoted a more modern and rational approach to interpreting the Quran, emphasizing education and social reform. And then there's the rise of movements like the Muslim Brotherhood, seeking to reassert Islamic values in this rapidly changing world. So these responses were diverse, reflecting the complexity of the challenges that they face.
It's clear that the encounter with the West in the 19th century continues to reverberate within the Islamic world today. The rise of Islamic fundamentalism, debates about democracy and secularism, the ongoing tensions between tradition and modernity, all of these are echoes of that historical encounter.
And Armstrong's book provides a valuable framework for anyone seeking to understand this complex history and its ongoing legacy. It encourages a deeper understanding that moves beyond stereotypes.
This deep dive has only scratched the surface of Karen Armstrong's Islam, A Short History. The book is rich with detail and insight, exploring the internal debates, evolution, and response to the modern world that have shaped this faith. I highly recommend reading it for a more complete understanding.
And you'll find a link to purchase the book in the show notes. Be sure to subscribe to Mindful Moments for more deep dives into fascinating topics. Thanks for listening.